Katie, before we jump in, whoa, crazy. Why don't you read this awesome question to our listeners that kind of sparked this discussion, and in so doing, sparked this episode?
Okay, so it's kind of long, but I'm going to paraphrase a bit. Can you and Elisha actually share some of the struggles you've had with your marriage? This sounds bad and it's a prideful thing in my heart, but I want to know that you two have actually had struggles and seasons of hardship because it seems like you've always had it all together. For families from a broken home with little guidance from parents, it sometimes seems overwhelming to achieve what you two have. I'm learning that God gives grace in our weaknesses and struggles, though, no matter what. And obviously, I understand if you can't share about deep things in your marriage, don't want to cause strife and whatnot between you two. I actually read it pretty verbatim, but it's a great question.
It is. Yeah, and it's, I'm so grateful that you took the time to submit that question and to write it out so thoughtfully and graciously.
Yes.
And same goes for like all of you that have written so many kind comments in the midst of submitting your question. It's really encouraging. So we're excited to talk about this one today, primarily as it pertains to our marriage. I'm sure that'll segue into parenting as it does. But yeah, let's get this thing rolling.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Katie, before we start, I want to acknowledge how you've been back in content creation mode more than usual, more than like your new normal MO. I'd say like your MO over the last 6 months, maybe year. You've been creating more content than what's been usual, and it's fun to see. And it's always fun to hear, because whenever you're creating, this is just, I think, an anecdote of creation. You get more ideas and you get excited about the things you're creating. So it spawns conversation, and that's been the case in our house. But I am a little confused because I'm not a part of the clubhouse. And so how do these new videos even get accessed by, I guess, clubhouse members?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We actually have a lot of members that have been a part of the clubhouse for years and or the Get It All Done Club for years and are just now finding the clubhouse.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of crazy, and I'm so glad you guys are finding it. So essentially, it's where I am adding new content every single month, and it's where our community is off of social media. So we've had this for, I am bad with dates, at least a year. I want to say 2 years now.
Okay.
We've had the clubhouse, and it started out as just a community. So the Get It All Done Club is 60 videos with little foundational systems for your life. But then everything that I've been adding this year are mini series. Every single month, I add a mini series or 2 mini series, and they basically build on everything in the original Get It All Done Club. And it's everything I have learned since filming the Get It All Done Club. I don't know. We had 3 kids at the time that I filmed that.
Wow. Okay.
So it's just our life has grown, our systems have grown, and I'm a lot more focused on, with these mini-series, giving done-for-you templates. So done-for-you printables, done-for-you templates that you could just modify digitally or physically, because I feel like women don't want to be spending all the time to be doing every single thing themselves. I've already done it for our home, and so you could either just print out what I have or digitally change it. So, because I give you the templates and the free, editors that I use to actually design the templates. So I've been having so much fun. We've gone over meal planning. We've gone over your foundational threshold. We've gone over fighting, whining, and bickering children. We're this month actually going over, we're keeping the one on my external physical brain. And so we're talking about our physical brains, external physical brain.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure. So your physical brain, but not the one in your head.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of confusing the way I throw in physical there. And we're also covering a plan for each day and kind of how I batch tasks through the week and how I plan my week. So anyways, these are just released for the month, and then they go and they get archived and they come back out next month. So if you, or in future months, so you don't ever get overloaded, hopefully. Nice. Is the idea. So if you would like to join us for developing a plan for every day of the week, this would be a great month to join us. That's open in April. We'll be closing it down in May. But I think it'd be really fun if you guys headed over and created a external brain with us and planned your week. So anyways.
Wow. That's awesome. So then do you go over that external brain on these like monthly lives that you do?
I do monthly lives in there, and we talk about whatever the monthly series was, and I
Okay.
answer questions about it.
Got
So
it.
we'll be doing that this month, and then in May it will be something different.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's fun. So talking about this question, it's funny because tonight we were going to do a Q&A,
Yes.
and we were going down all your very thoughtfully submitted questions and collecting them. And then we stumbled upon this one, and I think it hit a chord because this is a comment we've gotten for years, ever since we've been married. And I think initially when we would get this question, I would kind of think, well, we're in the honeymoon phase. That just comes across, and as we have been married longer and had more children and have gone through hard seasons together as a couple, we continue to get this question. And so we thought it would be worth talking about on this episode, and just kind of doing an episode dedicated to this tonight.
Yeah, it's always so challenging to know where people are coming from. I mean, I know I've said that before, because, somebody can be complaining about their spouse, and it's like, whatever, my spouse doesn't show interest in me, or they're lazy, or they're not kind to me. And you're kind of like, okay, I know that happens. And it's like, no, they went over to their parents' house. I haven't seen them for 7 months. You're kind of like, oh, wow. Like that's a huge, okay. Okay. That's a big deal, but you don't always know what the details are. And sometimes you hear the details. And I'm saying that to say, anytime people have been like, well, don't you have struggles? Don't you have challenges? Don't you have conflict in your marriage? I'm always like, well, yeah, of course. But then I never know what that means to them. That's the reason I said all of that, where it's like, is your marriage just, a blissful, cakewalk that doesn't have any hurdles? It's like, no, certainly not. Like, it is blissful, but there are certainly challenges. And then I think times I will hear about people's marriages and I'm like, well, actually our marriage isn't like that, it's much better. And so I'm saying that to say, when the context of these questions, it's, you don't know where people are coming from. And so we can really only share our story, which obviously includes our personal experience within this marriage, and then our parents, what we witnessed in our homes growing up, and then what we're striving for. And also I think some, we'll just start with that.
Yeah. So I think kind of breaking this down, we actually don't have any, we haven't gone through a really big challenge without mentioning it here on the podcast, but it's usually not mentioned real time. So we're usually telling the story back. We usually tell it with some humor because, once you get away from the conflict, it's kind of like, wow, we were immature, or wow, I can't believe we did that. But I was thinking through all of our biggest arguments, like huge fight, huge meltdown, Cancun. We've talked about that on this podcast multiple times. That was a very, very low point in our marriage. Very, very low point. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Cancun, we ended up, it was Cancun, right? Or was it Cabo? I get those mixed up. They're totally different places. Los Cabos. Okay. Los Cabos. I know they're totally different places.
Yeah.
But,
or Cabo San Lucas. I think that's Los Cabos. I don't know. I think those are all. I think Cancun's separate from the other places.
We were in some foreign country.
Yeah,
and what happened in that foreign country needs to stay there. We got off the plane off a red eye. We do not take red eye flights anymore. We were fried. And then we were hit with this cultural heckling for getting a taxi cab. And it was just, we are so wiped out, did not sleep at all. We're so on edge. And since then, we've gotten better at traveling with each other, but it was brutal. And Elisha wanted to just pay whatever these guys were charging. And I was like, no way are we spending that money on this. And it got really bad. We weren't communicating well. And we also weren't communicating well with the people who didn't really speak our language. And I ended up just getting in a bus and being like, I'm going on this. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
You can come with me or not. Talk about a low wife moment. I was so mad, and you were so mad.
Yeah.
And then we show up to this event where we're meeting a ton of people at this event. This is not just Elisha and Katie's vacation.
Right.
It
was everybody's vacation. Yeah. No, a bunch of people that we knew.
It was so bad. Anyways, we reached new levels of lows in terms of how we dug at each other. I feel like we were just so mad. And it was one of those conversations when we got to our hotel room where it's like you wanted to hurt the other person with your words. Like you knew where their hurt spots were and you were going to say it.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. Isn't it? Like when I look back at that.
Because you're not wrong. That's how it was.
It was.
That's crazy.
It was total like weaponizing the intimacy that you had with your spouse against them. That was one of those moments for us.
That's what it is, because I mean that is the dangerous, the vulnerable nature of marriage is just that you make yourself vulnerable, you open up. They know your insecurities, they know your flaws, your weaknesses, your sins, and it's like, man, you want to really be a jerk, you want to belittle somebody. Like you said, weaponize those things and totally make a disgrace of this covenant that God's put you in.
Yeah.
Boy, that's shameful. I mean, even years removed, it's like it's beyond embarrassing, because it's convicting, I guess, retroactively. I mean, I think it was in the moment too, shortly after, but it's almost more convicting now as we've grown up a little bit to think about doing that to the person that you have joined in holy matrimony with.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was pretty bad. Thankfully, it lasted about 6 hours. There were some kind of...
Is that it?
Yeah.
It felt like a long time.
It was pretty bad, though. It was like, how are we going to get out of this? And a random series of events kicked us out of that situation. And maybe this is where we aren't perfectly honest with you guys. We aren't going to go down the series of events that took us out of, like, how we reached our lowest low to be like, we are being really foolish. We need to reconcile here. But there are certain things that are just between us. So that is it. But it was a low moment. We definitely took some low blows at each other. And it ended up being one of the highest highs of our marriage as well. Like we just had a phenomenal time the rest of the trip.
Wow.
But that day was dark.
Yeah, we enjoyed it in spite of just getting in our own way there at the beginning.
Yeah. Another time when I think of, me being so embarrassed by my immaturity in our marriage, I've shared this before. It's pouring down rain. We're in Elisha's hometown where we know 90% of the people there. We are arguing in the car and all the kids are in the car. We have 3 little kids at this time. And I tell Elisha to pull over, and I get out of the car and just start walking in this super sketchy part of town. Kind of honestly, all of Centralia is kind of a sketchy part of town.
This was an exceptionally sketchy part of the town.
Yeah, very stabby. And I know that Elisha is very protective of me and like knows all the physical dangers that could happen. And so I was just like, I guess I wanted him to prove like he cared, and have to care even though he was so mad at me. And I don't even remember what we were arguing about. Do you?
No.
But it was so embarrassing. I'm just walking in the pouring down rain. It's probably publicly humiliating for our marriage if anyone drives by and sees me.
There's 3 kids in the back seat.
There's the kids in the back seat.
Wow. They're probably crying and like, what's going on?
Daddy and Mama were yelling at each other like, we're so mad.
This is so sad, Katie.
Well, that's not our marriage. That's why I can
I can't believe that happened though. It's nice that our children were really young, and I've never heard them mention that instance. So
they do not remember it. They were 2, 1, and 0 months. But yeah, anyways, so that was like a really low. I cannot remember what we were fighting over, but like that was a dark night in terms of what means I fell to for whatever reason in the argument. It was like not fighting fair. It was not being respectful. It was.
Yeah. Well, our tactics are different.
So
that's for sure.
Bad.
Like, I think you have blown my mind a handful of times, because when I've been a jerk in times past, it's, I'm like, I feel like a lot of guys probably do this, just like that stone cold, like, I don't feel a thing. You can say all you want. And I'm not going to leave the house. I'm not going to storm out. I'm not going to be belligerent. I'm not going to get violent. I'm just going to be stone cold, brutal. That's what I've done anyways in times past. And, boy, this is crazy. It's embarrassing just to think back on these instances. I don't even know if this is healthy. This is like Philippians 4 status, like dwelling on these past failures.
Well, I just want people to know you can have a phenomenal marriage and have really lame moments in it.
But I'm saying that to say that, like, you're not trying to justify your tactics, and I'm not trying to validate your tactics, but it's almost like you needed those tactics to kick me out of these cold stone moments of like, I don't care that you hurt. I don't care that you're sad. Like, I'm just going to sit here, and let you wallow in it. And you're like, okay, that's it. I'm out of here. Like I'm jumping on this bus or I'm getting out of the car, and it would always blow my mind, honestly.
It was like, this happened frequently, not frequently,
Whoa.
but no. What I should say is, if we got in a really bad argument, we would result to these extremes where like I would want to pick a fight and like talk it out, and Elisha would not want to say anything. And so I would result in some flagrant display of disrespect or putting myself in harm's way so that he would have to respond in order to get any kind of response. And I mean, I did this a couple times, like, especially like our first year of marriage was bad. Like I would actually get in the car and leave the house. That happened twice, which is like, you guys never do that. Like, terrible tactic. And like now we don't do that anymore.
No,
I don't do that anymore. I haven't done it for years, but like our first year of marriage, I didn't know what else to do. And I also didn't know that was like a terrible thing to do. And so I did that a couple times. I would like go down and sleep on the couch until Elisha would come down to the couch. And you guys, like, total baby lame stuff to admit.
I was not a good communicator. Okay. So like I would always have the mindset like, well, I'm just going to be mad until I'm not mad anymore, and then we'll talk about it. Which again isn't a very good strategy. Yeah, exactly. And you're like, let's bulldoze through this madness, and like in your mind, you're like, the best time to talk about this is while we're mad, because we can air it all out. Like there's no filters. You can just say everything that you've always wanted to say.
There's not, I don't know if I've ever had that mindset of say everything I've always wanted to say, because I don't have all this stuff backed up I've always wanted to say. But early on, we did have these things too, where it's like, maybe you would, Elisha's always been super loving and I've always felt super safe with Elisha, but kind of stockpile ammunition. So like I would blow up, I'd do these really embarrassing things. And then it was like, by the time you talked to me, you had like a really good long running list.
Oh yeah.
Of all the things I'd done wrong.
Yeah. That's like the sin, the embarrassing passive sin of like a passive aggressive person, or of even somebody that's more servant hearted, and is prone to biting their tongue and kind of being like, okay, like we'll just get through this moment. We'll get through this moment.
Which is really wise.
Well, no, a lot of it's based off your, man, it's like, well, I don't want to make a scene out. We're in the store, like whatever. Just let her, get the brand that she wants to get, or, or whatever. We're at church. Like just let her, take care of that. And then you get in your car and drive home. You're like, it's not worth bringing up. So you say, and then, then you, like you said, you have all this ammo. Like you're actually not forgiving the other person. You're actually not moving on. You're sitting there dwelling on it and just saving it up for the time that they whatever cross the line, and you bring out your ledger and you're just kind of like, hey, well, guess what? Sit down and listen up. Like these are all the wrongs that you need to account for. You have to account for over the last 6 months or 6 weeks or whatever, and it's just a stupid thing. And that's, again, that is something I would hope we've gotten better in, that I've gotten better in. Like,
yes.
I don't have this ongoing list of that I built up from being passive aggressive or from just being sulky over in my corner. In the first couple of years of our marriage, that was kind of an MO.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, it wasn't, when I say MO, like I'm saying like these are our down times. And I think that's the thing with our marriage is when Elisha and I got married, or like we're dating, we were like incredibly, I'm going to speak for myself. I was incredibly attracted to Elisha. I was totally starstruck with who Elisha was. And that has increased every single year that I've been married to him.
Wow.
And so it just like my respect for him continues to grow. My awe of him continues to grow. My excitement for him continues to grow. And so it's like, that's to me, like what defines our marriage is the excitement and the joy and the companionship that I have in our marriage. And I hope that Elisha feels somewhat similar.
Well, I'll speak, since you spoke for yourself, I'll speak for myself.
Speak for myself.
And I can say I reciprocate that sentiment, those feelings, because what's funny is that if anything, maybe a difference that we have is that I don't know if I really enjoyed our engagement hardly at all. It was like, I knew I wanted to marry you, but it was just kind of like, this is stressful. Like, I don't know what's going on here. And then, yeah, from the time we were married, that first year's like, wow, this is astronomically better than I could have ever imagined. And then year 2, what? It's better than year 1. And it's gone on and on and on. But there's been dips in every one of those years.
Yeah.
Like there's been moments in each one of those years where you're kind of like, well, that was the worst. Like, how are we going to, and you're thinking to yourself, like, how do we go forward? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't even know what's the next word to say. Because I'm so mad, you're so mad, we're so hurt, you feel so wronged. And you're like, I can't, the whole, like, you start walking my way, I start, what's that song? The Diamond Rio? Yeah. The Diamond Rio song. Like, it sounds good in theory, but like when you're both hurt and like, you're like, there's no place to walk towards the middle, like if we take any step in that direction, we're just
the middle got bombed out.
Yeah, it got bombed out. Exactly. It's just a huge crater. And so feeling those moments and then being like, well, we know we're staying married. Like, that was never a question, right? And
well, even when I've been my most mad, I cannot picture not living with Elisha. Like, I'd rather be mad and hurt and living with Elisha than on my own. Like, way hands down. That's not, because I thought of that sometimes when I'm so mad. It's like, I would still rather be here. Like, and sometimes that's what helps talk me into like, well, then I've got to figure this out.
Yeah.
We've got to figure it out. And I do think we say all this, the majority, I would say, of our these really immaturities were our first 3 years in terms of how escalated something would get before we'd address it. And it's not saying that hurt or arguments or things like that haven't happened over the last 5, but I would say it's gotten a lot less dramatic because certain things we cut out of our like arguing, I don't storm out of the house anymore. Also, I think we've gotten better. There's more trust. And so Elisha brings things up before he's comfortable, which I really appreciated. And I don't address things when I think they need to be addressed. Like, I'll let time go by. I'm okay sleeping on something now and being in bed and be so mad and be like, we can't talk about this right now. Like, it's late. We've never had a good late night discussion that ends well.
Yeah.
And so like, we'll have to talk about it in the morning.
Yeah. And
it's crazy how many things you wake up in the morning and you look at each other and are like, okay, that was so dumb last night. Like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Which did you grow up hearing the opposite advice? I feel like I've always heard the opposite. It's like, don't go to sleep mad at each other or something.
Don't let the sun go down upon your anger. Yeah, I think it's a biblical concept. That verse is, it's taken from a verse.
Well, I'll have to look up the reference because it might be wrong. No, I'm joking.
Well,
but I don't know if how that would apply to a marriage because it's like you said, when we had that attitude of like, well, we cannot go to sleep until we sort this out. It was brutal, long, no sleep, tears, more hurt. You're getting
you
tired.
End up saying things that you regret even more on top of it.
Yeah. And then it's like at some point you get sleep and you're kind of like, well, I guess we covered something, right? Like we made progress versus like kind of like, okay, well, let's go to sleep. And then you get up and you're like, well, that was not that big of a deal. I was like really tired or I don't know. So again, of course the Bible's right. That was a joke about that, but I don't know how the application would look.
Well, what's interesting, I think a couple things that have helped us is one, we no longer bring up difficult subjects right before bed. So like before bed is not a good time to be like, hey, I've had this on my heart. I'm really upset about X, Y, and Z. Like, because maybe it's chill to you, but it could be set off a huge chain of events with the other person. And so we do our best not to do that. Sometimes you stumble into those and it's like, oh great, now we're in a landmine and we didn't anticipate being here and it's 10 at night or 11 at night. And I think something that we've kind of gotten better at is agreeing to disagree and go to bed and sleep on it.
Yes.
So it's like, we're both fried. We both know this is not resolved, but we're going to talk about it in the morning.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's been like a mutual agreement, even if, because we just know we aren't going to see eye to eye on it that night.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like that does still happen from time to time where it's like you get back from an event together and it's like, oh yeah, I was talking to so you're doing a quick recap on the conversations you had and your own back and it's just chill and casual, getting ready for bed. Yeah, I was talking to so-and-so and I heard this and they said this and they're like, they said what? And I was like, yeah, they said, they're like, well, did you tell them that that's wrong? I was like, well, no, why is that wrong? You know, you're like, why didn't you confront him? And so, whatever. I don't know. Like, I can't think of a good scenario.
Yeah, you don't want to make it too specific. Our friends listening to the podcast are like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but yeah, some theoretical things do happen.
Yeah. I think of like, I'll use this example. We're like playing a game. Ready? We're going for it.
Okay.
And it was like a trivia game. And one of the questions, it was a name, like one of those name games. You pull a thing out of the hat and somebody was like, okay, she's dating Travis Kelce. And everybody was, and all the guys and me too were like, oh, Taylor Swift. And you were like glaring at me across the room. And we like get like in the car.
Not that bad.
We get in the car and you're like, how did you know who Taylor Swift? I'm like, oh, it's a sports thing. And it's like, I wouldn't care. And like, that's how the conversation started.
It was not that bad, Elijah. That was not one of the ones we had to sleep on. But he could feel my like, what? You like following Taylor Swift? Like, what? How many female celebrities you following these days? Know who they're dating? Yeah, my brain probably went there for like 30 seconds. It was encouraging that every guy in the room knew.
Yeah. That was encouraging, huh?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I respected all of them and you guys were all in the same league together. So I figured there was something
it would have been
that I didn't know.
If it was just me.
Yeah, if it was just you. Well, if it was just you, I don't know.
You're like, well, I still respect these other guys in the room.
Stop.
Just not my husband.
You know what I mean, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, though, like I said, as discouraged, no, I shouldn't say discouraging, as humbling as it is to think back on some of these dramatic instances in our marriage that really are obviously so immature and sinful. And yeah, I mean, I hope I've reconciled. Like, I hope I've apologized deeply, because it is crazy thinking back to some of those the state of mind I was in some of those instances and how wrong I was. But it also brings encouragement, and it's like, oh, but as we already mentioned, that year was a great year for our marriage. And that's an interesting thing about growth. And you can apply this to your walk with the Lord, where it's like you have a low moment in your faith where you're kind of like, God, why this, why that? Like, why did you make it this way? And what's going on here? I'm questioning that. And you're like, wow, I've gotten so and you feel like you've totally like backslid in your faith. And you're like, I'm less vibrant in my faith than I was 10 years ago or last year. But that can just be a moment. And then it's like, the Lord's so faithful. He's obviously the one that's sustaining us. And you go to him and you finish the year and you look back and you're like, man, I feel like I grew through that. Like, that thing itself actually is what brought growth. That thing itself is what helped you mature and experience a new level of your relationship with the Lord, or obviously in the context of marriage, where you're like, man, I don't ever want to go through that again. I don't want to be that much of a jerk. I don't want to be that sinful towards you. I don't want to hurt you in that way ever again. But boy, am I grateful for our marriage. Like, boy, do I feel closer to you than ever. And having some of those under your belt is also kind of like something to look back on and remember God's faithfulness and the blessing of the marriage covenant, where it's like I said before, when divorce isn't an option, or not being married, that's not an option. And so even though that chasm feels great and the Diamond Rio song doesn't seem to apply to your instance, you're like, well, I guess I'm not taking a step forward, but I'm just going to start taking steps. And at some point, maybe we'll circle back around to each other, and you get there and you're like, okay, that's right. The covenant is like, that's what keeps us right there. The feels, the fun, loving nature, that obviously I want that to increase as our marriage continues. But those actually do ebb and flow. Mm-hmm. And those, because of, being sinful people, there's going to be hurt, there's going to be strain. And so, but through that, you can experience those feels again. And, I don't know why I'm saying all this other than just kind of like, you look back and you're like, oh, that's right. Because right now it's easy to be like, somebody's saying, oh, you have challenges. What's the truth about your marriage? Like, it's awesome. Like, I love my marriage. It's like, has it been hardships? Like, it hasn't. And you bring up those instances and you're like, oh my word. That's
like, I remember how I was feeling in that moment.
Yes.
And it's not how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah. And if somebody would have seen it, from the outside or heard what we were saying, they'd have been like, well, they're destined for destruction, like that's not going to last. And yet here we are, a few years later, and it's like, wow, this is better than ever. I'm more excited about the next 10 years than I am the past 10 years.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And I think that there's an element, like you said, having certain things under your belt. There's honestly a lot of comfort that I take that we have gotten through really immature or really hurtful times. Not that I think they should be there, but it gives me so much confidence going like, okay, we've done that before. Like we've gotten really, really immature and still been able to build trust and build closeness, or we've both been really, really hurt and we've been able to earn back that close circle of intimacy and trust and forgiveness. And so I think that that's something that can bring a lot of comfort in a marriage. The longer you've been married, that's the interesting thing, is that if you go through really hard times, but then you're able to unify again, I do think it makes your marriage stronger. Mm-hmm. But if you go through those hard times and every time you get a little bit further apart and you start to keep a little bit back from your spouse, you start to withhold a little bit from yourself, and you don't ever gain that same unity and that same closeness, that's where the wedge starts driving. And you wake up 20 years from now and you're so far apart.
Yeah.
And there's no unity or intimacy there in your marriage.
Yeah, that's the lie of sweeping things under the rug, or it's still there, obviously. You just keep sweeping things under the rug, and it just like makes this mound, and you're on the opposite side of the mound, the rug.
Not cool.
Not good. It's unifying. It's not unifying.
It's not
unifying.
No unifying. Yeah. So we have had dark times. I think what, like growing up, when I saw my parents' marriage, my parents were and are a very dynamic couple. I saw them argue in front of us. They definitely had conversations. Like they didn't have all their arguments in front of us,
right.
But we saw reconciliation in front of us and stuff like that. Like I'd see my mom cry, and then both my parents apologize, or my dad apologized, or, whoever needed to apologize would apologize to us kids and to each other. And I wanted a marriage like my parents had. Like all growing up, I was like, they love each other. They still flirt. They still tease each other. My dad still brings my mom flowers, writes her notes. Like they have this romance and this vibrancy and this excitement about each other. And that includes arguments and disagreements and them being really fried at each other too.
Right.
And so I think going into marriage, I didn't know of anybody's marriage like my parents' marriage. And in the dating pool, I really had my expectations blasted to smithereens after a couple failed relationships, where I started kind of seeing behind the veil of some other marriages I knew and some other relationships that I thought were great, or some other people that I thought were just fantastic, and going, whoa, no one's actually happy. Mm-hmm. No one actually has a really good marriage. They're all just either faking it or living with like mounds of hurt. And,
staying together for the kids.
Yeah.
Or
just agreeing to like, we don't talk about this topic, like totally keeping, like not total intimacy and unity, just choosing to coexist together and have a good time. And you can have a good time, but not have this like close companionship where you can be totally vulnerable with the other person. And I just thought, okay, well, I don't want to be married at all if that's what marriage is going to be. Like my parents are a unicorn and my grandparents are a unicorn, but they are a different generation, so everything was better back then kind of thing. And then in meeting Elisha and in our marriage, I could truly say like I get to be the beneficiary of not only my upbringing and my parents helping protect me and God's protection on me for no reason that I deserved, but just because I happened to be born in a certain family and happened to be protected the way I was. And then going into a marriage with a man who had incredible examples of parents as well, who taught him from a very, very early age, going into a marriage with a man that didn't have tons of baggage and tons of like neither of us were perfect, obviously, and we were both failed humans, but like not like a consistent like pornography addiction. Like I'll say that I think like I got to go into a marriage where that wasn't this habitual struggle. And so for me, being a wife to someone like that, I do get experience just blessing upon blessing upon blessing that I do think a lot of women just don't get to experience in their marriages.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way,
know?
obviously. But I will say, I think what's more important than the person's past, in the baggage or the lack thereof, is their current view of marriage. It's like, what's their philosophy on marriage
Yeah, you're right.
going into marriage? Because I think there's a lot of people that have, checked boxes of saving themselves for marriage or refraining from pornography or keeping their hands off the other, the opposite sex in a certain, to a certain extent, and being like, okay, I did all those things. But like their philosophy or their expectation for marriage is flawed, and that destroys like the marriage. Like it's bankrupt right from the beginning, and vice versa. I think people could have a life that was, by whatever, our definitions more checkered with sexual sin or, past relationships.
Or just not having like great examples.
Sure. Not having good
parents.
Examples, but like the Lord gets their heart, gives them the proper view of marriage. And it's like, they're able to have a vibrant marriage. And I'm not saying there aren't, practical ramifications to like past relationships and past sins that you have to continue, to live with if that's a thing. But I think what sustains a marriage is your perspective on it. Like, what is it? What is this thing that I'm getting into, that I'm partaking in with this other person? And I think that's, again, of course I appreciated your standards. I still do. It's more and more. And I'm so grateful for the standards that you had in dating and before marriage. And those are extremely important. I'm not trying to diminish those, but your belief on what marriage is more important, I would say, as you enter into marriage.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. And what I think I was trying to communicate was just in response to this question with this gal not growing up with great examples, maybe coming from a broken family and being like, it seems like Katie and Elisha have it all together, And I think in a certain instance, we are starting off on a foundation where a lot of, you mentioned these belief systems. I don't take a ton of stock in like, the purity scale or whatever of when we got married. I do think we got to experience a blessing from that, like you said, but it's more, I think, because the way we were raised with perspectives on marriage that, like you pointed out, that set us up really on the right foot when it came to marriage. We'd seen parents walk this marriage walk very well before God. And so I think we came into marriage knowing what elements there's going to have to be compromise here. There's going to have to be, when it comes to like disagreements and stuff, you can't just be like my way or the highway. You're in this for life. Yep. There has to be an element of respect that goes there, of servant-heartedness, to not freak out when there's arguments. A lot of the stuff that I did in my immaturity when we were first married, I never saw my parents do. Mm-hmm. Like I knew like, this is not how you have this is not a good argument, Sure. But like even knowing that can be helpful too.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, well, this is always how I saw my parents argue. This is just how people do it.
Right.
So it was this goal to work toward not being that way, knowing it was unhealthy.
No doubt. And I agree with that. I think something that I big time value is just observing the way my dad treated my mother in our home, in public, the way he spoke about her when she wasn't present. Like, he truly cherished her, and he spoke so well of her, and he loved her. And it's like, would they argue? Absolutely. Like, the same instances where they would get heated in the car and there'd be arguments, and they would reconcile to each other. They'd apologize to us. Again, they didn't have all their arguments in front of their kids, right? But being able to witness that, and then I think seeing you, like you said, the same thing from you, where it's like I didn't even realize like I guess the boundaries I had because of what I had witnessed. It's like, there are certain things that I've heard men say or do that's like, that wasn't ever even, that's like not an option for men to behave that way. But I attribute that to, I think, the example that my dad set. Like, he modeled for me, like, well, like, you can be angry, you can be upset, sure, but like, you don't cross these lines. You don't say this. You don't do this. Whatever, like, you don't do things like this in marriage. And I think seeing that and having that expectation, even when you are angry, like I said, we've already shared some embarrassing stories, but there still were, whatever, like thresholds we were not going to cross because of, I think, what we saw growing up, and obviously in addition to what we were convicted of because of God's word.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I guess, what I wanted to, you're saying it so much better than what I was trying to say. Like, there were certain thresholds just because of our upbringing that, like, I've always felt loved and cherished, and Elisha has never crossed over into a territory that would be a long-standing, like, any hurt that's happened in our marriage can totally heal. You know, it's not this like deep rooted hurt. And hopefully, you know, there were things that hopefully, you know, you feel the same way.
I do.
Where it's like, there are certain things where I just, I never talk to my husband like that. Or I would never say these things and violate his trust or violate, just different aspects of his masculinity, or just, there's just different things. You just don't go there. And I think I'm seeing those more and more and more. Actually, the more we're in this space where you guys are so open with us, and a lot of you have really incredible marriages, which has been such a blessing and such an encouragement. And then some of you have really heartbreaking stories that you shared where I'm just like, wow, I didn't actually know like that could be a thing.
Sure, that like people can say that or do that.
Yeah, and be in this union, and it's just, you kind of can't imagine like, wow, how it would be to live with that. And so my encouragement to you is you get to be you get to set a fresh foundation for your children, and they get to witness your marriage and you learning how to walk married and fight for loving each other and fight for intimacy and fight for openness in your marriage. And you get to give them that example of a marriage that isn't perfect, but that is God honoring. And I think that's incredible if there are generational chains or generational hurt or pain or just a lack of a foundation there. Sin. It's like you get to lay that first foundation in God's strength. And it will be harder for you than it is for us. And that is just a fact. And that's something I want to acknowledge, I guess, is the goal is not a marriage like Katie and Elisha's or whatever, or someone else that you know and admire and know really like each other. I think we can take advice from, and I want to take advice from couples that I really enjoy and admire, but the goal is just working towards the God-honoring marriage that God has for you. And it might be filled with more hurt or more work to be done before you get to a place, more years, and before you get to a place where you do have that comfort and enjoyment of each other. Yeah,
you're right. It's, you know, even when I think back to past sins, hurts, you know, offenses, it's weird getting to an old age now. Well, no, where it's like you've lived some life as an adult. Because I think like as a kid or as an adolescent or a teen, it's easy just to kind of like chalk that up to like, okay, I was a kid or I was a teenager. But then there's now time where it's like, oh, that happened to me as an adult. Now I have to live with that as an adult. Like that is just a part of, like I said that, like we made that mistake. And this can obviously goes beyond just marriage, you know, it can be like a financial mistake or a business mistake or whatever, you know, a relational mistake within your church or something. And then you're like, well, okay, like that is a fact that I did that, or I said that, or I made that mistake. And now okay, like this is where I'm at now. Like, and I have to move forward, from here. And that's where we're at. Like, that's where we're at today. And that's where you have to cling to those Bible verses that old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And there is newness of life in Christ. Like it's so, I guess, refreshing, or it's exhilarating to think that like God makes dead things come to life. You know, that's like what he does. I mean, obviously God spoke it first and foremost. He spoke and made something out of nothing. And then he takes his people, and that we're sinful, rebellious people, dead in our trespasses and sins, and he's made us alive in him. And then you go to the hopeful verses of like, man, if we say we're without sin, we're a liar. Like nobody's without sin, but if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us. And you just have this template for hope. You're like, oh man, like I've been crucified with Christ. It's not I that live, it's Christ that lives in me. And the life I now live, I live by faith, through this, in the one that died for me. And like, I don't know, you cling to those verses, hopefully all the time as Christians, but, even more so, I think when there's things in your past, there's sins, there's hurts, there's wrongs. We're like, that's truly a part of my history. Like, even if it's like one of those things where it's like actually documented, like it's on your criminal record, like, and that's an obvious thing here, but it's the same case, even if it doesn't make it on the criminal record, like I did that thing. Like I said that, or I did that. Like our marriage went through that. Our marriage is in this place right now. And you're kind of like, oh wait, that's what God does. Like he makes all things new through faith in him, through walking with him. And I want to lean into that as we continue on growing in our marriage.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing is as you like read marriage books and learn from people who have really healthy, vibrant marriages, Elisha and I are very newly married. We've only been married, 8 years in May. And so I'm always wanting to learn things about marriage because there are so many things you don't have to live through in order to avoid or learn from. And I think there's so many things where it's like, I'll read it in a book and be like, I've done that. Like, that's what it's doing. Those are the ramifications. I thought that was totally, like, I didn't even think of anything. I didn't think anything of that.
In the moment.
Sure. I know Dr. Laura, for whatever reason, had a ton of those, like the proper care and feeding of husbands. She had a ton of stuff in there where I was just like, oh my goodness, that is me. And so I think that's a wonderful thing about learning is being able to go and then like, okay, I'm going to take that mode of communication out of my vocabulary. I'm going to stop communicating like that. I'm going to stop communicating with other people about my spouse like this. I'm going to stop bringing up sins that are in the past. I'm going to just, if forgiveness has been given, then I'm not going to bring that up again. That's no longer serving my marriage. I'm going to let scars heal,
Wow.
And there are just so many things I just want to continue learning because there are true practical ways to live a vibrant marriage. I mean, primarily scripture. There's so much in marriage, about marriage in scripture.
Yeah. I mean, you even think of that, bringing up past sins. It's like, picture our Lord and Savior doing that.
Yeah.
Does he
devastating.
not, does he not have talk about ammo, like having a whole reservoir, and he chooses to not see our sins. He's like, I accounted for those. They're done. They're washed. Like, and I see you as this beautiful bride. He sees the church, and just even that we have that language, that this is a picture that our marriage is a picture of the church's relationship to Christ. And what does he model? Especially speaking to husbands specifically. Like that we're given that commission, like husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So like if you just stop there and consider that for the rest of your life, like, okay, how did Christ love the church? And just do a deep dive on that. You're like, then you will be a better husband. You will be loving your wife more and more. You're like, okay, I'm supposed to love my wife like Christ loved the church. I'm just going to spend, whatever, the rest of my marriage trying to discover how did Christ love the church? And you're kind of like, oh, wow. Like it's humbling to think about how he's loved us, and he did that as an example for husbands, or I should say that's not why he did it, but we can look to him as an example.
Yeah, and you do that to me. I'm so thankful. I'm just so thankful for you. And I think sometimes I feel kind of foolish, thinking, oh, well, enjoy your marriage, or like you can have a good marriage and like when I get to live with Elisha, because it's like, I do feel like God's just chosen to give me abundant blessing for no reason. And I'm really thankful for you.
Likewise. I just am, each year I am flabbergasted by the blessing that you are. And so grateful.
Yeah. So I guess like the truth about our marriage here on the podcast too is we don't have any really big, scary skeletons in the closet that we haven't brought up one way or another here on here. And, we don't share specifics about things, obviously, because that's one key to a good and happy marriage is keep things private between you and your spouse. But I guess there is this element too, because I want there to be this element of like, okay, we are relatable in terms of we go through hard times too, but also this hope of like, we genuinely have a marriage that I would not trade with anyone. Like I would not trade our marriage for anyone or anything. Yeah. Period. Like I don't care. The most like in love, like celebrity couple, like that looks okay. I'm saying the couples that like look in love, like in a movie screen, like a total fictional romance or whatever. Like I wouldn't trade my marriage for that. Like the depth and the just pure joy that I get to experience in my marriage. So that is real. And I think that that's something that it's wonderful. Like I just pray for a marriage like our marriage for each one of my kids, and that the Lord will continue to sustain our marriage over the next decades, because it is possible and it is out there and in Christ. Yeah. And because like Elisha said, he makes all things new. So it's possible for each one of us to have a very rich, fulfilling marriage, regardless of where we are starting out.
Yeah. Amen. Folks, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, we would love it if you left a rating or a review on wherever you're listening to it at. If you're watching us on YouTube, we'd love it if you hit the thumbs up or subscribe to our YouTube channel, or share. Maybe you could share our podcast on any social media platforms you might have. Farewell.
Bye.
Bye-bye.